Lindsey. I'm one of the co-founders of Hedgey. We do token investing and lockups for a lot of teams when they launch tokens. I'm not going to talk about that today, though. I'm going to talk about token design. I'm also a mentor at Consensus. I'm also a tokenomics mentor at Polygon. I've been building in the space since 2017 and working with a lot of companies that are either have tokens or about to launch tokens or have launched tokens. And I think the input I have here that can be helpful is I've seen every way it can go wrong. Even when you have all the best intentions and everything works perfectly in theory, my advice is my insight is that I've f***ed up and seen it f***ed up so many times that maybe I just have a different perspective at a high level that can help as you're also in the weeds to pull out and just think about things from a high level. Today, I thought we would not talk about sinks and faucets. I probably spent more time picking images for these slides than writing them. But I thought we could talk about a few things, token design over the last 5 years, just to put in perspective, like how token design has become what it is today and how we think about it. Talk about things that are the not token part of token design, like all the other factors that have influenced why tokens are designed the way they have been. What is the purpose of a token? Just that's more conversational. And the last thing is just a few case studies and shilling governance tokens, only because I heard everyone here hates governance apparently. And I think that's totally fine. But I'll still make, a college try at it just to talk about governance a bit. So look, before we start, I looked at all your companies. I look at what you do. I looked at the one-liner of your token design. But I just want to hear from you, who are you? Why do you need a token? It's the thing you'll be asked. You should be able to talk about. Just 30 seconds, jump in, tell me your company and why you think you need a token in it.
Sure. My name is Eric Astromecki. I'm with TravelSwap. Points and reward systems are synergetic to the travel ecosystem, have been 25 plus years. Traditionally, they're devalued as mergers go on, and there's no on-chain mechanisms, which means your Amex points, your Marriott points, all of these things are non-transferable, and they're always devalued. So being able to have an on-chain rewards mechanism puts the power back into consumer where they're able to control with what they do with it.
You want to make a point system, but a point system that can go across other platforms.
Correct. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. Even dual reward systems where you're able now to, the equivalent of you earn an Amex point and a Marriott point. Imagine earning TravelSwap and other tokens, right? The whole point is that just bring what's already there on chain.
Cool.
Sure. So we're building an affiliate software and network, and so there is a lot of value that can be transferred between the project that are using this affiliate software and the affiliates. Web3 is full of word of mouth, and there is a big need in really big affiliates. We want to create a token that will basically reward the affiliates, and also we are looking to create this kind of system where it can reward both projects and affiliates. And the big reason is product growth and bringing in affiliates and basically bootstrapping the network.
Bootstrapping, rewarding. Is it reward money rewards, or do they get some kind of use out of it?
So you said people hate governance. We are starting to think about the governance more and more. About the token that will be rewarded to affiliates is going to be governance.
Got it. Seeds are planted. All right. What about Mags or Alex?
Yeah, I could jump in. Hey, sorry I'm not on video. We're building obviously an ecosystem token for the world we're building, but specifically focused with go-to-market around this product that we have, and it's a location in Goblin Town and in our universe called Meme Depot. And Meme Depot is going to be the place where you manage, make, and monetize memes. And we think that there's a really interesting opportunity to reward and financially incentivize a utility and have it be a really interesting way to go to market, as well as sustain this sort of marketplace utility. So there's a lot there.
Is there the utility of it marketplace where you have to buy it in the token and you can earn the token? Is that kind of marketplace idea?
Possibly that, like as a sort of secondary thing, but primarily it is like there's creators and curators of these depots. It's sort of like a Pinterest
Got it.
for memes, and so as a way to reward and transact in this product,
Cool.
and in our universe. So.
Cool. Thanks.
Hey, so yes, we have a generative AI world building model, environment model. And so with our users and like over 12 million environment creations to date, and clearly there'll be more, we want to leverage our users for refining this model based on their input. And so creating a reward system for participating, a curator score and a creator score, and being able to refine with our community, essentially, based on user preference and input, a system in which we can collaboratively improve the model.
Got it. So, sorry, just on the token part of it, is it like collaboratively improve the model, like governance, or is it some other approach?
It's somewhat like governance, but also just like basically a weighted, like hot or not sort of score, and then based on other weights, like your success of being a valuable contributor to the ecosystem.
Cool. Hot or not is still governance, I think. Probably a better form of it, to be honest. Cool. All right, that's helpful. And look, for some people here, all this stuff might be a bit redundant in the beginning, but I just want to make sure we're all kind of on the same level. So I wanted to kind of map out token design over the last 5 years from like how the things that happened in 2017, which is not obviously when tokens began, but it's when a lot of interest in new tokens kind of exploded on Ethereum, how that kind of led to the things we saw in 2020, and then now the things we have today. In 2017, like, I don't know if everyone here was around then, but it was the era of ICOs. Airdrops were non-existent whatsoever. Everything was a utility token, and SAFs were like kind of how you raised money. I've had DentaCoin as my model here, which is kind of a low blow, but DentaCoin was a popular ICO from 2017, and they were creating a blockchain for dentists to allow you to have an ecosystem to pay for dental services with DentaCoin, and just create this ecosystem. And I use it because it's kind of a joke, but it was a very popular ICO that had a very high market cap, and it had a really strong utility. And that was very much symbolic of what 2017 was. So then, after that, regulation came down, ICOs were no good anymore. People had to figure out how to give their tokens and make money off tokens and do all this stuff without selling them. So airdrops started to actually become a thing. Utility was still really common in tokens, but instead of just doing ICOs, they would airdrop tokens to people. And then after airdropping them, then they would sell tokens on exchanges. That was just kind of the same stuff as 2017. Now, most of the ICOs died from this period, mostly because they just ran out of money. They all had a lot of ETH, but they ran out of ETH. As far as tokenomics go, everything that I remember pretty much was just utility. It was all DentaCoin type models. And it was a really popular model until like 2020, and Uniswap was not the first, like, obviously not the first DAO. ETH was the first DAO, but it wasn't the first like governance token, but it was the first mass produced kind of distribution of tokens for governance, and it really sparked this next era where governance tokens became a thing. Now, people don't like saying this, but a reason governance tokens became a thing was because people needed to distribute tokens to their community in a way that would not send them to jail. Utility tokens were getting a lot of heat. Selling tokens were getting a lot of heat. People were starting to raise money from investors for their safes and side letters, so they weren't having to sell tokens. And they were fine just creating a token, giving it out, giving it to their investors, and now they have a token. I'm not saying that's what Uniswap did, but that was a common model. And it would be naive to think that regulation and tax didn't shape token design at the time. and shape entire ecosystems because people wanted to distribute tokens and they just found the most compliant way to do it at the time. Now, after that, what we started to see, or what people who did this started to see was DAOs did become the norm. Governance tokens became the norm. DAOs suffered from this interesting phenomenon where they became paper rich but cash poor, meaning they had a really high market cap, but since they didn't sell any tokens, they had no actual money. So they just had to constantly sell their tokens to keep the lights on, which ICOs didn't have that problem. So you saw a lot of people starting to push away from this and explore other ideas, whether it's social tokens, NFTs, obviously during this time became a big thing. IDOs, which are initial distribution offerings, IEOs, exchange offerings, initial liquidity offerings, launchpads, basically everything with an I and an O that didn't have a C in it became a thing. And it was a way for people now to sell tokens without calling it an ICO. So that started to happen. Now that we're in 2022, 2023, what we're seeing is a swing back to where utility tokens are a thing, because a lot of people are seeing them as actually having value in their ecosystem. Whereas 2017, it was all just white papers and vaporware. You are seeing governance tokens 2.0, which I'll talk to you about, like an evolution of governance tokens that improve on a lot of the faults of the early models. And you're starting to see hybrid approaches, things that have utility and governance. So I know it's a lot. I don't know if we've ever all thought about it this way, but I can pause here for a second if you have questions, or is this a helpful framing for, I guess my point here is helping you think about like why tokens are designed in these kind of similar ways at certain periods of time.
One of the things that I see, like thinking in this sort of timeline, I go to thinking about the different waves of liquidity, because that also playing a role in terms of driving different tokenomic designs and factoring, right? Because ultimately, like, where is liquidity coming from? Like in the 2017 like ICO phase, that was in response, and like you had this new wave of liquidity of people that had bought into Ethereum or Bitcoin in earlier like epochs, basically, and now they had liquidity and they were looking for something, they had value that they could put into some. And so that's where right, all those ICOs were, a lot of them they raised those funds in ETH, coming from that liquidity. And then 2020 also coincided with the rise of the value of ETH going up. So now you had people that had held on to ETH during the crypto winter before that, and now all of a sudden they had sort of like excess value that they could speculate on. But also you had like DeFi summer, and that driving like a new wave of liquidity into the ecosystem, right? Because I think there was definitely a wave of post like ICOs, a lot of people that had been in the space early, they kind of moved on, right? And like
Absolutely.
And so it was a new wave of like people that were entering the space and giving and supporting tokens in 2020. And the reason I just say this because it's also like that also sort of influenced a lot of the different type of mechanisms, right? With like airdrops and governance, and how are you using tokens as almost like a user acquisition marketing tool in 2020, 2021 versus using it as a primary fundraising tool in 2017. Where we're going now, I think it's an interesting question, because it's like, where is the liquidity going to come from? And you do need that for tokens to really have a real life behind them.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I have an example I'll share towards the end of Safe, which is a locked token that has zero liquidity. And it's because they raised $50 million in VC funding. So they don't really care if it has a price. but it's a good point because 2017 was raising from ICOs. Between 2017 2020, VCs were not investing in anything, so you could only sell to retail. Uniswap was the place where airdrop token companies raised capital. But then going into 2021, a lot of companies raised VC funding, so they had less pressure to sell tokens to fund their company. So I think that's where we are today, is seeing a lot of tokens come out that aren't like, if I don't have $1 million from the launch of this token, I'm going to be shut down in a month. So it's interesting. It's a really good point.
And it's also super important because it's like so much of what we do and like a lot of the, I mean, like we all work off of case studies, right? And it's like you look at the examples, but understanding why these case studies exist from 2020 is just as important as sort of seeing how they were done. Because the why in terms of decisions around the tokenomic models and releasing tokens, and I agree, I think SAFE is a really good example that you can create a token, give it utility, get into the hands of community without, you know, overly concerning yourself with creating immediate liquidity for it and like a market for it. So
that's totally right. So look, I'm not going to spend too much on this slide because I know you're going to be talking about a lot of this next week, and so will we with you. But I think to kind of wrap that point up is, you know, token design or tokenomics is not an island. It's not just this thing you do alone. When you do it, there's the regulatory considerations, entity formation, your tax considerations, both as a person and a company, token valuation, all these things have influence over token design. Like if you talk with these people, they'll tell you their thoughts on if burns make your token more likely to be a security. And no one knows if that's right or wrong, but the point is a lot of the concepts we have with token design are heavily influenced by the current like landscape of regulation and tax. And so I think that's always been a major factor that's driven a lot of the major choices. So yeah, 100%, like just have to always keep that in mind. And where we are today and what that means for today, I don't really know, but I guess that's why you all are here to figure that out. Okay, so this is another high level kind of thought, and this is before I go into case studies, but it's like the question of what is the purpose of a token? X of liquidity for investors, which is it's just a joke, but to use it like money or to coordinate actors within an ecosystem by incentivizing good behavior and disincentivizing bad behaviors. And that's a lot, but I think like the point I want to get here is like just stepping back and thinking why you have a token, whether it's Travel Swap or Sharement or Block Labs or Truth Labs. I heard a lot of comments about rewards and paying people and doing things, and there's someone who I'm going to show you this case study, but there's Nahar Shah from Jump Trading, and he gave one of the best speeches I've ever heard on token design, which was that if you design tokens purely around price impacts, they're doomed to fail. And he said that the purpose of a token is to coordinate people. And if you really build a good coordination mechanism, things that you set a North Star with what you're trying to accomplish and use your token to incentivize good behaviors, disincentivize bad behaviors, that's the core of how you build a sustaining token. Now, I have ETH, which was his example up here. And as an example, like the North Star of Ethereum proof of stake is securing the network and making it usable. Those are the two jobs of the token. Now to do this, you know, validators earn ETH when they do the right thing. Like, you know, when they either run a validator effectively and they run a consensus, or if they don't do that and act maliciously, they get slashed and they lose ETH. On the other side, making it usable, gas becomes expensive when the network is in high demand, making people not being able to like DDoS attack the network. And then gas becomes cheap when the network is in low demand. So, you know, Ethereum's such like a lame example for like tokenomics usually, but it's actually a really good example of a utility token. It's the best because it's a very clean, straightforward example of how a token can coordinate actors in a decentralized way and make the product do what it's supposed to. In a way, it wouldn't be possible without the token. And I think it's important because a lot of times we think of token as a go-to-market strategy, and we think about a token as like a way to pay people. But when you launch a token, that's going to be your life for the next 5 years. It's not a go-to-market strategy that helps you for 2 or 3 months isn't worth, and having a shitty 5 years after isn't worth it. So I think the point of your token design is thinking, how does this thing not just help my network on day one, but what is this token going to look like 5 years down the road? And if you don't think about that, look at every company now, or every tokenized company that's 5 years old. Look at what they're dealing with. And some companies have done a good job of that, and they're thriving, and some not. A last case study here, Helium, which I heard you all were into utility tokens, so I was just loading a couple of these examples. Does anyone use Helium here, by the way? Is anyone familiar with it?
Use an offshoot
Oh, yeah.
of Helium, but
What's
never
that?
Helium. I've used an offshoot of it, so similar DePIN network, but not Helium, the product.
Got it. Who said, oh yeah?
Heard of it. Yeah, I had a buddy that was selling it for a while, and I was pretty
Yeah.
into it. Was a diehard maxi.
I used to be into it too. Someone sent me a device and I geeked out on it for a while because I like the idea of it. They wanted to build a network. So you would earn Helium if you basically set up this device and it did the thing it was supposed to, but you earned less Helium if you were offline, or you were trying to game the system, or if you just did things that were bad for the network. And the other thing it did was it made the network usable. You had to pay our Helium to onboard a new device to the network to earn, and you had to pay Helium to interact with the data on the network. Helium fucked it up later. If you're recording, just don't put that in your marketing stuff, but they made things more complicated because then they made it a governance token and they added a lot of complexity to the token, which really ruined it. And I think, I won't go too much into the weeds, but that's because this model was great, except for the very bottom, which is you had to pay Helium to interact with the network, and nobody really cared to interact with the network. So their model just fell apart. But the point being is HNT was a good go-to-market strategy for Helium because it made people want to buy devices and be online and interact with the network. But it wasn't planned to just be a gimmick. I mean, they had like a 10-year roadmap baked out to really support the network. Okay, my last kind of point before I just kind of more open up a conversation is talking about governance tokens. I heard there was a lot of pushback on governance tokens. I don't think they're perfect at all. I think a lot of the earlier governance tokens were just liquidity events for VCs. But I do think we're entering a phase 2 of governance tokens where there is a use case. I have 3 examples here. You need a Uniswap, Ethereum naming service, and Safe. Uniswap was like the first one to do this at the scale they did, in the way where like everyone used Uniswap and got this. Obviously Sushi kind of did something before, but Uniswap, the interesting thing about Uniswap is they almost launched it reactively because they were getting vampire attacked by someone and they just felt like they needed a governance token. But it really doesn't do anything. I would say it's not real. Like, you can vote in the Uniswap forums, you can pass decisions, but a lot of people give this token grief because the one example of it having use has been to turn on fee switches for Uniswap, and that's been talked about for 2 years now, and it's never happened. And finally, Uniswap, as a private company, turned on fee switches itself like a week ago. So a lot of people are just not really bullish on that governance token right now, but we'll see. ENS is a governance token, and it's really interesting because ENS is a great DAO and they print money. They didn't make a governance token to have a liquidity event. I mean, they just print ETH. They have a ton of ETH. They're one of the most well-off DAOs that there are right now. But they wanted to decentralize decision-making on how that money was allocated. And I think that's really interesting because there's the labs, there's the foundation, then there's the DAO. And they specifically said, we want the DAO to have a say in certain parts. We want a broader group of people to have a say in what ENS does. So they gave ENS its own treasury, and they gave tokens to a large amount of shareholders just to direct that towards either growing the network or participating in certain things that just benefited the DAO. The last example of a governance token that I'm going to share is SAFE. Is anyone here familiar with SAFE? High level? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, got used Gnosis for quite a while before,
Sure. Gnosis is interesting because Gnosis launched an ICO and raised $300 million in 2017, launched SAFE as their internal bank because they had $300 million worth of ETH and they didn't want to keep it in a MetaMask. And then eventually SAFE became a product on its own, a massive product, and now it's spun out and launched their own DAO. SAFE is really interesting because they're well off and they're venture backed, and they launched a token and they wanted to maximize governance participation to make decisions about the future of SAFE, but they didn't want speculation. Like they didn't want people buying and selling tokens because they didn't want those type of people early on. So what they did was they let you claim SAFE if you use their products, but it's non-transferable, and it has been for a year. And what that's allowed them to do is really focus on people who are mission aligned with their kind of broader mission, and allow those people to participate. But also it's very hard. Actually, you cannot just buy your way into governance with SAFE. They don't let people just buy it, make decisions, and leave. It's just this kind of closed network. And if you go look at governance forums, which are like what all these things used to talk to each other, it's just a bunch of people deciding about the future of SAFE, which includes, should SAFE token have utility? So it's a really interesting model because it's the first token I've seen that launched as a governance token that was non-transferable, that collectively is deciding how it evolves into a utility token. So these are just 3 examples of governance tokens. I'd love to actually just kind of stop for a second and see if you hate governance tokens or governance on utility tokens, why? And I won't say I disagree with you, and just maybe start a conversation on it.
Yeah, so I don't hate governance. I followed this and have been following, governance for about 2.5 years now, and studied pretty from, the way tokens are used for vampire attacks to ENS dropping. And then I think most of the time, as you said, it's more of a liquidity, event, right? It's all about really, how do you get, if you just give your token to random people and you're letting them try and, dictate decision makings, you just have a bunch of idiots trying to drive the bus. And then nobody who's serious is going to buy in. And so the coin just goes to zero because no one wants to buy into a clown show, right? But then you see Arbitrum, right, where I looked at how they deployed their DAO, and, they gave allocations to the biggest projects and the users, the biggest platforms that had done it. So they had sourced a really strong base and then focused their liquidity around it. And it looks like SAFE is doing it as well. So done right, it can work, but it's blown up in the face from like a decision-making and then growth standpoint more times than not. And so it's always a concern of like, how as a founder, do you have the right to be able to make decisions that can make things grow without having to go and check with ideally potentially a group of people that might, as you said, bought their way in, have no idea what's going on, but yet wants to vote on something all of a sudden? And how do you eliminate all of that stuff? That's the number one concern of why governance is me, is I don't want a side seat driver.
Super valid points. And I think you could point to a ton of DAOs that have messed that up. And they have become clown shows, like you said, just because there's a lot of people who only care about the price of the token making governance decisions. And to your point too, it's interesting because if you can buy or sell a token instantly, your incentives are very short, right? You care about the price of a token tomorrow. We recently worked with Collabland. They launched their token and they wanted to avoid that. So one of the things they did, and this was actually our vesting in our lockup products, is they enable governance by their investors and their team, even on unvested tokens. And I think that's an interesting model, because typically when companies launch, the only people who can't vote are the team members, because they don't actually have their vested tokens yet, and usually investors, just because tokens haven't been allocated. But those are the only people who actually care where the company's at in 3 years. So I can't say I've seen it fixed, because this is a newer idea, but I think a lot of people are thinking just like it.
I'll say like governance. So governance, most if not all governance only tokens fail to capture any value. So from a value capture perspective, having only governance like ENS and like recently Uniswap, there's not really an incentive or a sink for people to hold the token other than governance. And when you think about why people purchase a token for governance, it's either to build on top of the platform, which I would say a minority of people do, or it's to ask for grant funding, which is another faucet for the token, which results in downwards price pressure because people have to sell the token to complete whatever grants they're applying for. So governance, like as its only, governance is a utility, but it's not a method to. It shouldn't be your only utility. And for tokens like ENS, especially, the fact that you can't even use the token on the platform to buy a domain really is kind of a troubling lack of feature for the platform.
It's a good point, Vincent. In general, just you bring up a good point, and this isn't about ENS or anyone specifically, but just in general, the point I made earlier about how tokens are for coordinating. I think one of the things we have to think about governance tokens, and when you say they're only for governance, is how do they coordinate people? How do they incentivize good behavior and disincentivize bad behavior? And one of the things that's been missing with governance tokens, or many of them, is there's no identifying even what bad behavior is. Like, what is bad behavior with the governance token? And how do you punish someone for doing that behavior if you don't even know what it is? Or maybe it doesn't exist. And without that, it's not really ever going to coordinate people. And so governance, one of my criticisms of just governance in general is there's a lot of apathy with it. A lot of people don't vote or participate. And if that's the North Star of a governance token, I think even having things where if you have tokens and you don't vote with them, they get slashed, is a way to disincentivize bad behaviors. And maybe they get distributed to people who vote. I won't get like in the weeds on design approaches, but like you bring up a good point that you can't just have a token without a purpose.
I think to that point, I think also just like the concept of governance as a whole is also evolving and has evolved, right? Because I think there was in 2020 where we had a rise of DAOs, and I saw this firsthand with Lead DAO, right? Where we deployed it as fully decentralized. There was a treasury, revenue from the games was sent to the treasury, then the community could vote on the use of that treasury, right? So that was the sort of governance loop that we had. Now, there was this sense, I think, from a lot of people that, oh, it's a DAO, this should be fully decentralized from day one. And in reality, that's just not feasible, right? You have the sort of like, there's a sort of a evolution, right? You naturally are going to start more centralized in the earlier days of a token's life, because you kind of need a core team that can just make quick decisions and operate rapidly, right? And so I think even when you step back from that, it's like, well, there are areas where governance can, like, we call it governance, and I think we think of one big thing, but it can be something smaller that technically does fall under that umbrella. Like you mentioned at the beginning of the call, right? With like blockade, right? Like there are actions that are governance actions, but it's not the full like governing the protocol that I think a lot of people think of. So it's kind of like there can be forms and elements of governance. Like I think another one that we've talked about with projects with like Sharement, right? You guys have, there's a marketplace for companies that to be listed for affiliates to find them. You can have a governance mechanism of the curation of that marketplace, right? That doesn't necessarily mean managing the whole thing, but it's like there's a piece and there's like, I think that sort of part of that is you know the users and the community members and how they evolve their thinking about it too, because I had a lot of people in the lead community that would come in and be like, wait, this is BS, this is not fully decentralized, like the whole DAO should be voting on this, it shouldn't be the core team shouldn't be making decisions, like that's just not realistic. So like people's perception of what governance is has to change as well, but I think companies can harness the energy of that, like basically that like 10% of your community, if that is very engaged and want to weigh in, and like how do you channel that as opposed to trying to achieve this like full community weighing in on every the big decisions and use of funds.
Totally, because a lot of early governance was how do we manage a $40 million treasury. And that's very different than, was it Marguerite, did you mention the hot or not people voting on? Those are very different, and arguably people would much rather participate in your form of decision making, because that's just a funner way to use the tokens you have to make decisions, And so I do agree. Like, I think what I see now, my example, I didn't really talk about Demo, but Demo is a utility token at their core. You earn it by connecting to your device to your car, and it gets real-time data. In return, you earn these tokens, and then people come to the network. They have to use their token. Like Helium.
I'm a huge proponent of Demo, by the way.
Yeah,
it was I was one of the early users. I got the airdrop last year, and actually, I know the team pretty well, and I helped them with one of their latest governance proposals on using data credits to purchase information instead of using.
So yeah, there you go. That's it. So like they have that model, but then you can also vote with the token. And maybe in Demo it's a little heavier, but I think from that perspective, that's where I see a lot of tokens going, is they have utility in the products, because I think you can do more with the token now than ever. But they also do have some type of voice in the company. Now, it's not like Demo's saying like, hey, should we like change our like manufacturing approach for these hardware devices? But they're saying like, hey, should we onboard this person to the app? And I think that's kind of stuff that's interesting with governance that might be helpful to like fit into a broader tokenomics model. Marguerite, did you have any thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, so I worked really closely with the Decred community back in 2016, 2017. I was like head of marketing. And something I learned about that governance project, which is, I still think to this day, like we're a really well-designed system, but is that it's really hard to get people to care about deep, like technology and how it all works behind the scenes versus like a really fun app to engage in. Even when you think of like investors or people who would be on a board, they just they rarely read. And then they don't care enough or pay enough attention to the actual ecosystem developments that all your creatives are really passionate about. They just like to see performance. And so I think like you guys noted, there's a disconnect in incentive there, but also when you think of like the hot or not sort of model or games and like what we're hoping to drive with different applications with maybe somewhat governance type utility, is like this immediate satisfaction that like I may not be the largest token holder, but what I do and my impact I make has some sort of reward, and it's somewhat gamification that I immediately personally, if I'm correct or right, have some sort of positive outcome that I can build on. Just being able to contribute to ecosystem that's really hard to measure success, especially over time and dispersed, it's less fun. It's just innately less fun. And then if you think you're not important or you don't have enough weight, then why participate at all?
Yeah, I totally. I mean, if you can give people a dopamine hit by participating in governance, then congratulations, you're the first person to ever do it. It's such a mundane
First person
process.
ever in all of history's governance. Like,
yeah, right. No, it's true. And so like, I think that's the opportunity here though, right? Give people a voice and do it in a way that's more scalable and coordinated than, without a token. And so I think that's a really cool frame for it as well. And I would love to see the next wave of projects come out that take that approach to decision making rather than just day one all out. How do we manage like our treasury? And some people do need to do that, but not everyone.
but I think there are I saw a lot of projects also where you have a governance mechanism, but then there's nothing to vote on for months. And so then it's so hard to have people's attention. So like small, low stakes, even just like fun things, sort of like right off the bat, like let people start participating right off the bat and like appreciate the value of what they have, even if it's not like tee up a whole bunch of things, which is something that I've seen like some projects do. It's like, because if that's part of your utility of like, and the purpose of that token, you don't have anything for a while. When you do have something, it's so hard to get people to come in and actually vote. Like reaching quorum is so difficult, and it's such a pain.
I mean, we do the grants for Arbitrum, and they just distributed 50 million ARB to protocols. And since we're handling the distribution of that ARB, we were just following it and just seeing exactly to your point, the difficulty in just coordinating. I mean, for their case, they had the opposite where they had so many people applying at once that it was like, it went from like very little to a tidal wave they couldn't manage. But that makes sense since Arbitrum is an ecosystem and a network, right? But I think for everyone on here who's more focused on building an app or an ecosystem in your own network, like Jake, to your point, starting small, starting easy, starting fun maybe is like the most important word there, because like you can make it fun. You can make tokens very fun in an app, and they can have utility, have a voice, and be fun.
Something I've tried to message home with all of us over this last 6 weeks is that you can always add governance later. You can't add governance and then take it back once it's been deployed, or at least it'd be very hard to. So to your point, Lindsey, and even what we're thinking about with Blockade is like the hot or not system, and using the token to just vote on very small feature sets and very controlled environments for your ecosystem and your product. I think our approach is that teams should take going forward, because if people just launch governance tokens because that's what everyone else has done, then we don't explore new avenues or new ways to make tokens fun or to improve governance. And so using a token for hot or not in a vacuum like that, in a very controlled environment, is a great way to, like you said, add fun to tokens. And you can take that approach to all of these ecosystems that we're building here, because I don't know if having a DAO with voting on day one is the right approach for every ecosystem. I mean, why don't we try something different? And the fact that you can add governance later is only a good thing in these cases. So,
but yeah, I'd add to that, because there's an investor there's someone who started a lot of the early DAOs, and he always says it's very easy to launch a DAO. It's very hard to fire a DAO. Mm-hmm. And his point wasn't actually don't do DAOs, but it was that you don't have to make it this massive group of people on day one. And that, like, if you look at examples like Safe, they picked a few select companies, and I think Eric, you brought up this point, and they gave them massive allocations of voice to participate just because they were people who they partnered with. We have people who are exploring that idea, but the ability to revoke tokens. So giving people locked and revocable tokens, and starting with 6 or 7 key partners that strategically really help you in the space to be involved with some of your decision making is still an early form of kind of decentralized decision making with people, right? and you can
Yeah, we
eventually
agree.
scale that out. But like, there are different ways to do it, and it doesn't have to be starting with 1,000 people if that's not the thing that's best for your organization. So definitely being aware of it and just knowing there's a lot of mechanisms you can do. I mean,
I do think one of the things with the like incentives, it's something we saw with DeFi before, like the gamification that was really Ponzonomics, but people really trying to introduce gamification, was like the being able to successfully design something that's really simple, that can be skill-based wagering, that is exciting but not illegal. Like crossover between game development but not needing to make an entire game, because that's really hard and hard to scale, and content there, like it's just, that's very difficult to win at. But there is like simple intersections of like, what is something that can require human skill in decision making purposes that help overall the ecosystem, that doesn't, like, you don't have to be a super expert to participate in. But there can be, like, when you were talking about one of those slides earlier, was there are negatives for being wrong and there are positives for being right. I do think, I don't know how many users will actually be interested in these sort of systems, because even just like, as most of us application developers know, when you introduce crypto, drop off and participation is pretty high. It's like, for a casual person, it's like 90% drop off. How do you make something accessible enough that you could like or not like crypto? And that was something that I've thought about a lot, even just in games or other applications, creative marketing, viral things that we've done. But at the end of the day, the stigma of crypto and just your people who are going to jump into your chats and ruin the creative energy with, you know, one moon sort of stuff, it is interesting to balance. And so you can say all you want that this is going to be a just for fun token, but that's in the back of everybody's head. That's not what they're thinking. They're thinking like, oh, we're going to get in early and we're going to make this awesome and pump it, you know? So like
100%. No, I agree. It's actually why I really like Safe's model of a non-transferable token, because it allowed zero speculation.
But didn't you, in all fairness, we saw that with Blur though, and everyone knew that non-tradable point was a farm to a real point. So now you even have people that are like, yeah, like even when I look at the Safe tokens, my brain says, okay, yeah, they gave me this soulbound token as a prerequisite before the liquid. I almost feel like the degens, like that meta's already played out. Like we at least when I look at the marketplace and the traders and the stuff they're doing, you know, the amount of airdrop farmers, and we see these kind of standards roll out across protocols and DAOs across chains. That's what, at least, you know, I'm on Team Margarita there. It's like, yeah, it's always going to be a balance of the right users using the platform to get the tokens, if you're going to do, and the people that are most likely to be long-term contributors. That's like the only thing you can do to save yourself.
I totally agree with you. I'd say FriendTech is another example where they use points to carrot people. Yep. I'd also say, though, thinking of their stage, just in the sense that both of those were growth strategies for younger products. I mean, FriendTech was incredibly young. So those are just incentives. For Blur, it was to attack OpenSea. And for FriendTech, it's just a great viral growth strategy. And they just doubled down, and both of those really focused on fucking crypto people, right? They weren't going after normies. They were going after crypto degens all the way. I will say with Safe, though, it was a bit different. Oh, sorry, Marguerite.
I was going to say, do you think like the metagame of the NFT cycle we saw with like taking collectors a step further, and there was a skill-based strategy and collection and group organization and around moving a market that was a step up from just a straight fungible token, where, you know, your intelligence as a collector and how to do that like was multi-tiered in strategy. I do think like that's a big part of why NFTs were successful in an akin way of pumping tokens happen to be at different times. But, you know, anyways, like, can you have a totally successful, scalable, ongoing fungible token outside of ETH and some of these other ecosystems? You know, smart contracts really introduced a whole new paradigm of how we think of application development. And it was truly innovative. So I think you have to be able to support creators and contributors and developers independently bootstrap their own projects in a scalable way in order for the token to be ongoing.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, look, I'll tell you, like, I don't think anyone should launch a token before they find product market fit, if I'm being honest. because I feel like it makes it very hard to ever find product market fit after you have a token, because a lot of the conversations you will be having are what are the price of the token, and no one's found a way to avoid that yet. So
Well, that's
yeah,
why friend tech is so interesting, right? So they're signaling very hard that there's points that there's going to be a token sometime in the future. Now the question is, and it's good that they're launching this token at least 3 or 4 months, within the product's launch, not at launch. The thing is, though, and what'll be really interesting to see is if the network effects increase or decrease on friend tech specifically once the token is launched. And by way of like the product's design and by way of, the user type that they're going after, I think that the network effects will fall off a cliff once they launch the token.
I would bet on that as well. I would bet on that as well, but they don't care. I mean, they've printed, $80 million. So as far as that investment goes, there's no one who's going to be mad at what happens when they do the airdrop. So I agree with you, but I mean, it's just, I think they're actually already winning as far as what they're trying to accomplish, because they charge you 20% on, both sides on every swap. So they're
So
doing
Lindsey,
well.
what do you think of Floor Protocol hijacking all of Blur's momentum now that Blur has basically exhausted its ability to do that? You already see Blur now getting run into the ground by, like that new site that's coming online.
Yeah.
So I think like Vincent does have a point that like these products that build off token hype seem to, I mean, Blur was the best, and even then they're getting crushed right now, and people are chasing the new token because they'd rather chase the next airdrop than stay with the product, which means you didn't win consumer loyalty. And if you don't get the loyalty, you're screwed again. So it's like,
no, you're right.
Watching all these live environments,
This goes a bit deeper than just token design, but this goes into, and I was deep in last bear market, and so I really understand the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivations from community members. And Peter Pan from 1KX is a beautiful article on this, which I think goes into everything you're talking about. Which the last thing you want to do is build a product that drives community through extrinsic motivations, which is token and price. You want people who feel mission aligned to what you're doing and who feel like buy-in on a spiritual level to your project. And you found that in the last bear market. You found people that when people launched tokens, like when Helium launched, when I was mining it, it was, I don't even know what the price was because I didn't give a shit. I just didn't even check, and it was probably a penny. And I was just on the Discord asking people how to improve my antenna setup. And I became part of a community. I made a lot of friends. And so I was really attached to that community because I met a group of people who I made a tribe with, and those were my people. And when the price moved up, then, a lot of things changed. And I guess I maintained that kind of connection for a while. But that is very different than building a community of people who come to you because they think they're going to make money very quickly by being in that ecosystem. Because yes, those people are extrinsically motivated, and they will leave the second your price falls or someone else has a better offer. So
I think NFT communities do this really well, right? So we saw a lot of people building around different IPs of large cap NFT projects, Apes being a big one, Artifact CloneX being another one. And that also added another layer of intrinsic motivation that fungible tokens don't have, which is digital identity. And so I think in the case of like Artifact, especially, given that they have 3D assets and they're playing in this like digi-fizzy realm, like there are a lot of vectors to incentivize creators, community members, and really create a flywheel around building that IP ecosystem out, especially in the context of gaming, like fashion, these different like AR and VR.
I agree with you, Vincent. I mean, I think NFTs did a really good job of helping people find tribe, right? Kirsten has a lady on right now. There's a goblin on. If you look at like Ape DAO, even though they've crashed, Ape DAO has one of the most active governance forums you've ever seen right now. And it's because they can visually identify with a group of other people and have like their commonality. So yeah, I think a lot of this stuff is interesting because tokenomics, I guess going to my earlier point, isn't just this island, right? There's a lot of other elements involved in this conversation here, having a healthy community that has a token and having that token add value to what you're building rather than become this tangent or distraction or thing that ends up at worst killing your company. Like imagine launching a token that kills a company that could have done great if it never launched a token. No one wants to do that. So don't. But you know, look, I know we're out of time here, but I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope at the end of a Friday, this has been helpful just to get some thoughts stirring in your head. I have my Telegram, my Twitter, and my Discord are all Go for Lindsey. If you need anything or want any of the resources I shared, I'm happy to just send you anything. I'll be back here, I think, in a week, or Alex will, to talk about token investing and investor lockups and a bunch of the back office stuff. But it's very interesting because it's actually a lot of that stuff is kind of connected to this conversation as well, kind of giving a voice to people and also having better control over how tokens enter your ecosystem. And then I think we're back the next week. So look, I appreciate Kirsten and Jake, you having me on, and it was great talking with you and hearing your stories. I feel like I've been in the weeds that you're in before as well. I don't know if I've ever gotten out of them, but hopefully, I can look at what you all do and get closer to that. So thanks again.